I'm Howie Lim. This is Money Hacks by the Business Times.
Valentine's Day often prompts couples to plan extravagant dinners and gifts. However, while focusing on these short-term romantic gestures, many overlook a more crucial aspect, which is financial compatibility. Considering that more than 1 in 4 breakups are linked to financial disputes, aligning investment strategies and core financial values can offer much more enduring benefits than a single special evening. So, how can couples test their joint financial decision making? For more insights, we're joined today by Jeremy Tan, who's the CEO at Tiger Fund Management. Jeremy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Howie. Thank you for having me.
So as a married man, did you do this with your wife, test your joint financial decision-making, your financial compatibility, so to speak?
Well, I think it's really important at the start before going into marriage and also settling down, having a new home, to go into open communication with your partner on really the long-term financial goals that you might have, whether be it having children, buying your new home, because I think everybody is different in terms of their financial outcome, their financial preferences, they have different goals. At the start of the marriage, or a lot of couples, they do not go into this kind of conversation because they think that their lifestyle is actually compatible, or they do not actually have any conflict at the start. But I think that it's really important to iron out all these goals, all these differences all the way at the start, so that we can actually be on the same page. Everybody have different risk appetites. Usually, some people may have lower appetites than others. They may want to have more financial certainty, whereas they may be more goal-oriented. They want to use their capital to be a bit more risk-taking, to be a bit more forward-looking. And without that conversation at the start, there can be breakdowns of the marriage or staying together.
What about the red flags that couples, in your experience, most commonly overlook in the early stages?
Well, I think really at the early stage, if the red flags will come when they do not communicate, like when they try to evade conversations around financials, I think these are very important. We do note that when we come into this kind of arrangement, whether be it as a couple or as a spouse, I think there's going to be a lot of financial obligations. It's quite important at the start to not evade all these conversations. We need to come together to talk about, how finances will eventually be settled or actually shared amongst both parties. We do understand that many couples, they have their own arrangement, and not all arrangements can be fair. But I think it's more of that conversations and how each couples actually come together to create that environment where, there could be a cohesive or shared responsibility.
Okay, beyond the joint account, though, are there other things that they can do? More critical structural arrangements a couple should make in order to, safeguard their shared capital?
Sure, I think many couples would use a joint account. They would deposit their salaries into the joint account. This probably is not the only way. In fact, couples should still maintain their own accounts, managing their own personal finance. Maybe they could have some hobbies that they want to maintain. So I think the joint account serves as a good purpose to align some shared goals. They may not contribute evenly at the start, knowing that a lot of couples do not make the same salaries. They are at different stages of life as well. But beyond joint accounts, perhaps couples could also really have some form of a documentation, because we do know that in terms of some investments, even though couples go into a 50-50 kind of arrangement, but the contributions may not be 50-50. For example, in the form of a very large purchase, for example, like your house or certain investments. Beyond that, I think couples should have their own arrangement. They should also document that arrangement down, so that in the future, there is any discrepancies or disagreements, I think they can come back and use those documentation to actually iron out the differences.
What do you think, though, would be a really good practical starting point beyond the joint account then?
There could be some couples that are more calculative down to the dollar amount. But I think the dollar amount or a certain percentage over the long run, I think really not sustainable, taking into account that life is always not about 50-50. I think it's more of shared arrangement, that kind of shared decision that will be made into certain financial decisions or certain purchases. Many times you can't just split down the line or veer against that line. It's more of communication and also noting the fact that some couple may not contribute as much in terms of that dollar quantum, but they can actually contribute more in terms perhaps of their decision making, perhaps contributing more in terms of their research, or in terms of finer things like smaller things where some day-to-day spending, some meals to mitigate unfairness, so to speak. I think it's more of that communication. Really splitting down the line in terms of that dollar amount, I think is really not sustainable given that life actually changes. The dollar amount that you make also varies. Doesn't mean that you make a bonus or you win a lottery, you should contribute more. I think it really is something that's more comfortable arrangement for both parties.
What do you think is worse then? Especially as things get more expensive, there's inflation and such, right? What's worse for a couple? Their mismatched risk tolerance or their mismatched long-term financial goals? Because what if one's a saver, one's a spender, you know?
Well, definitely the latter. We definitely need to have that kind of shared long-term financial goals. Like we do note that the risk expectations at the start could be a bit different because some could be in a capital preservation mode, some could be in a growth mode. So there will be a lot of disagreements when they come down to personal finances or growing their wealth because one party wants to grow their wealth in a more risk-taking manner against one that is more conservative in nature. Setting some goals, mental bucketing some of their goals, I think is quite important. Split down some goals into near-term goals, future goals, and long-term goals. All these different goals, I think you can actually mental account them and have different risk appetites and different horizons into how to meet some of these goals. We do note that some goals could be really important to them. You definitely need to take a more conservative approach to achieving those goals. Whereas some goals could be more aspirational. For example, I would want to move into that condo or go into a very nice holiday in the future with my family and friends. Those mental bucketing, you can actually assign different horizons and different risk parameters to them so that you can actually reach those goals.
Still to come, does this mean we have to be keeping an eye on our partners all the time? And also, how do we have this really unromantic conversation? Is there a nice non-confrontational script we can follow? More with Jeremy Tan from Tiger Fund Management in a moment.
Lens on Singapore is now bigger and better. The same deep dive exploration of socioeconomic and geopolitical issues which impact our lives here in Singapore and the region is now a video podcast. If watching a conversation is your thing, join Clarissa Montero in monthly conversations about things that matter. Subscribe to the BT Lens On playlist in the podcast tab of the Business Times YouTube channel and start watching today. BT Lens On Singapore, now available in audio and video.
And now, back to Money Hacks from the Business Times.
What about financial transparency? How much of it should we have? Because, to be honest, I am a bit hesitant to show my spouse everything. I don't want them knowing about my guilty pleasures, which is subscribing to all of the streaming platforms, that sort of thing. Because you also don't want to feel as though you're constantly needing to keep an eye on each other, audit each other.
Sure, you're definitely right. Even though you come together as a marriage couples, it's really annoying in the sense that there is someone always trying to police your spending. Perhaps you could have a joint account on certain shared goals, but beyond that, I think it's important to still maintain your own individual accounts that you can spend freely within your limits to indulge yourself or reward yourself for all the hard work that you do. Just looking at putting everything dumping into a shared account and then policing and monitoring that kind of spending on a day-to-day basis is really not sustainable. In fact, it can be a bit more annoying because you're actually infringing into their space.
Let's talk about the final exam then. Let's say we were to test the compatibility, right? So money market instruments could be the testing ground. And then what investment vehicle represents the ultimate test, you think? The ultimate compatibility final exam, so to speak?
In my view, as an equity fund manager, I think for equities, I think would be the asset class that couples will find it very challenging to manage. In fact, based on statistics, 90% of retail investors actually lose money because of their emotional biases, because they did not set out their initial goals at the start. And we do know that equity as an investment class, they tend to be more volatile. They also tend to be more long-term in nature because of that volatility. And many at times, because of that incompatibility of aligning their goals, some couples may be very fearful during that kind of a drawdown in equities investments, because we know that equities are very volatile, right? We just had a 2% drawdown in S&P last night, for that matter, because of the Greenland War. Couples may not stay true to their investment objective if they do not actually set up the alignment at the start.
I didn't quite ask you if they should be having these conversations before getting married or just at the early stages of marriage. What do you think?
Well, definitely, I think this is a ongoing communication. When it comes down to money, I think it tends to be quite sensitive, right? Even with friends. In the initial phases of that relationship, during dating, I think you can actually send out some test balloons, whether, you guys have really compatible financial objectives. That is very important. Like you mentioned, many marriages or relationship actually fail because of that incompatibility. So in the initial phases, I think it could be wise to start to find out whether you guys are similar in terms of your spending habits, in terms of your long-term goals as well. And going into the later phase of the marriage, I think it's also important to start talking about the reality of life, like how you're going to fund or reach these objectives with a proper set of investment objective and goals.
What's a test balloon, though? Give us an example.
Well, some partners may not be open about their finances. They do not want to go into open communications. They feel that this is really their privacy. So I think that if at the initial stage there is a lack of communication already, I think that going forward, as spending starts to become more complicated, life becomes more complicated, the dollar amount of spending that you have for the family on an ongoing basis will also rise in the future, with kids, with housing. Initial phases, I think the test balloons that you said would be whether they can go into that open communication, that transparent habit of sharing about their day-to-day or what they actually want in life.
What do you do about emotions, though? People always say, don't bring emotions into it. Financial advisors are telling us, don't be emotional about it. Don't go into FOMO and all of that. But emotions play a big role when it comes to money. So, what sort of non-confrontational way of speaking should we use when it comes to maybe trying to tell your spouse of a potential financial blind spot they may have?
Yes, I think it's quite important, right, to not really just target blind spots or their bad habits, because I think that will really close the doors on all communications, right? As with all open communication, I think it's important to really start talking about it from really a problem-solving approach. How can
But
we
then a $10 coffee is ridiculous. Can't I tell my spouse that?
Yes, I think that's precisely it, right? I mean, everybody have different expectations and different set of values on how they spend their money. For instance, many of my friends, they would actually indulge in that $10 cup of Starbucks coffee on a day-to-day basis, when you could have a $1 coffee or $2 coffee because of inflation right now. I think it's really going down to that goal alignment perspective, in the sense that, yes, you could still continue to indulge in spending to reward yourself, to push yourself further. But whether this set of spending is going to drag you so much so against your eventual goal, or is something that you can still reach there by adjusting a bit of that habit. So I think that curiosity, that problem solving, that you come together to try to reach that certain goal, I think it's more effective in that communication, rather than just pointing out like, hey, you shouldn't do that, or you're really very spendthrift. Like, I think this would really close all doors on all communications.
Jeremy, how long have you been married?
I have been married close to 10 years already.
Sounds good, which means you're successful and we shall take your advice. I wish we had more time. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Howie.
Jeremy Tan is the CEO of Tiger Fund Management. This has been Money Hacks by the Business Times. I'm Howie Lim.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts. Or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.